This is Frank Fantini with Joe Asher, CEO of William Hill US. And a lot of folks know William Hill, but many folks in the US might not. It is a British, London-listed sports betting company, bookmaker, that in recent years has become a major internet gaming presence and has established a beachhead here in the United States that Joe operates, and it's a growing operation. And Joe, with that introduction, maybe you can give us a little more background about the U.S. operation of William Hill.
Sure. In the U.S., there were three companies that were operating here in Nevada that William Hill acquired 3 years ago, and that then became the William Hill U.S. business. Presently we operate somewhere around 103 sports books across the state of Nevada. In addition to that, about half of our wagering is on a mobile app. But you have to be physically present in Nevada to place your bet. And additionally, we have a hardware and software licensing business called CBS, which provides technology that many casinos use to run their own sports books. And we're also the risk manager for the state of Delaware's sports lottery in partnership with Scientific Games.
And if sports betting does come to New Jersey, you're positioned to be part of that too.
We are. A couple of years ago, we did a deal with Monmouth Park. Dennis Drazen, who's the principal business person at Monmouth Park, has been really one of the main advocates for the legalization of sports betting in New Jersey. And so we have a deal with Monmouth that we are their sports betting partner when it becomes legal in New Jersey. And obviously the question is, when does that happen? But it'll happen, and when it does, we'll be there.
One of the things we talk about with the folks from the more conventional gaming technology companies is we talk about this enormous fast pace of change in the gaming industry as technologies converge, as the industry becomes globalized, as unregulated kinds of play like social gaming and fantasy sports and so on proliferate. And William Hill, by virtue of its big online presence, and you mentioned the mobile, so much of the business is mobile, William Hill, both in the U.S. and globally, is part of that technology change and convergence. And I know you can only speak for William Hill U.S. and not the whole company, but how do you see that playing out?
Well, so much has changed in the world in the last 10 years, right? I mean, the iPhone didn't exist until 2007. And it's literally changed so much, and things like Facebook and Twitter. So the whole world's changing, and the gaming industry is rapidly evolving technologically as well. And on the sports side of things, probably the single biggest change has been around the mobile apps and the ability of the customer to bet wherever he is, as long as he or she is within the state of Nevada. And also in-play wagering has grown from basically zero to about 20% of all the business we take now. And so those are probably the two most significant technology-driven things that directly affect us. But technology is continuing to evolve, and it will continue to evolve at this but it's amazing when you think about just the lightning pace at which so much has happened. It's really, it's really impressive in what has been accomplished in a very short period of time.
The internet in almost every industry has been a tool of empowerment for the individual. And we certainly see this in gaming, where Betfair invented exchange wagering, so you did not have to go through an odds maker any longer. One of the things we'll talk about here is daily fantasy sports, because I know you have a lot of learned opinion. We might mention it that Joe is an attorney, and he's between his role at William Hill and his professional background, has a lot of knowledge of daily fantasy sports that a lot of other people, like industry executives, don't have. I guess we'll start up this part of the discussion by saying that maybe one of your best quotes was, if somebody doesn't think it's that daily fantasy sports is betting, that it's baloney.
It is. Of course it's gambling. I mean, I said if you don't think it's gambling, I mean, that's just the idea that daily fantasy is not gambling is just a bunch of baloney. Of course it's gambling, and everybody knows it's gambling. And you know, one little line on a commercial that says this is not gambling doesn't mean that it's not. It's gambling. I think anybody who's being intellectually honest about it is. You're putting up something of value, cash, to win something of value, more cash, and on something with an uncertain outcome. And that's sort of the classic textbook definition of gambling. And you know, you just look at the advertisements that they're running around daily fantasy now, and they're classic, you know, appeals to gambling, talking about how much money people have won, people holding up the big checks, the guy sweating the outcome of the game. So I think the suggestion that this is not gambling is just totally ludicrous. Now, the fact that it is gambling doesn't mean it's legal or illegal, but let's at least acknowledge that it's gambling. The fact that it's skill-based, which is, oh, well, this isn't gambling, this is skill-based. Well, I actually accept that daily fantasy sports betting does have skill involved, just like blackjack has skill involved, just like poker has skill involved, just like traditional sports betting has skill involved. So the fact that there's skill, it's just an interesting fact, but it doesn't mean it's not gambling.
Now, I'm assuming that William Hill is sort of neutral on this in the sense that you might get someday, depending how things work out, into the daily fantasy sports business.
No, I don't view it that way. I mean, I'm all for daily fantasy sports betting. I think it should be legal. I think it should be regulated, and I think it should be taxed. Just like I think traditional sports betting should be legal, regulated, and taxed. I think there's this interesting debate amongst different people in the industry about internet gambling. Right? Some people are for regulated, legal internet gambling. Others are opposed. But daily fantasy is unregulated internet gambling. And I don't know who is in favor of unregulated internet gambling. So, no, I'm not. I wouldn't say that we're neutral. We're in favor of daily fantasy sports betting, just like we're in favor of traditional sports betting. But let's acknowledge what it is, and let's make it clearly legal and subject to regulation and taxation.
You had said earlier in relation, I think when I'd mentioned New Jersey, that sports betting is going to happen. What is your, if you had to predict, let's use an easier word, what would the sports betting landscape in North America look like, or U.S. look like 3 to 5 years from now?
You know, it's so hard to pigeonhole it into a specific time element, and 'cause obviously there's the litigation going on in the Third Circuit in New Jersey where there's a chance of an en banc hearing, which would obviously have significant ramifications for the national landscape. There's the reality that eventually there would be litigation in another part of the country around the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, which is the main federal statute involved in basically prohibiting state-sponsored sports betting outside of 4 states. And so the outcome of that litigation will have a significant impact on things. And frankly, the outcome of, you're beginning to get calls for the congressional hearings surrounding daily fantasy sports betting. Certainly, I think that can impact what happens with traditional sports betting as well, because if Congress is going to open up the issue of daily fantasy sports betting, well, certainly they should open up the issue of traditional sports betting as well. Right. I mean, how can you be for one and not the other? That to me is illogical.
Yeah, and I think Congressman Pallone from New Jersey is already, in calling for a hearing of daily fantasy sports, has already made that same point in terms of sports betting generally.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, it's illogical to be for one and not the other. If you're against all sports betting on moral grounds, that's at least a consistent position, I suppose. But to be for one and not for the other it's just an artificial line that you can't logically support.
One final question on DFS, and not to make this entirely a DFS discussion, but
I think of it as DFSB, by the way.
Okay.
It is DFSB, Daily Fantasy Sports Betting.
Okay. For DFS-B, how, I know that we've had this discussion in the past, and you feel that if regular sports betting is legalized, that daily fantasy sports would lose a lot of its appeal to people who would rather just bet on an Eagles game than bet on a collection of players doing something.
No, it's interesting. I don't really view daily fantasy sports betting as competitive to traditional sports betting. If anything, frankly, I think it's helped the traditional sports betting business because so much focus and attention is now on gambling on sports that that logically feeds this business. I mean, look, the daily fantasy sports betting is an unproven business model. The top two companies are spending massive amounts of money on advertising, and they're not profitable. And whether two companies become profitable is very much an open question. Whether they eventually have to merge and the surviving company becomes profitable, again, it's an open question because they're spending so much money on advertising that I think the viability of the business model is still an open question. But I've not heard from anyone who's sort of concerned that somehow this is threatening their business in any respect. I don't know what's going on with all the illegal bookmakers all across the country, but if I had to hazard a guess, I don't think they're particularly concerned about daily fantasy sports betting, and they may, in fact, even be seeing the dynamic we're seeing here in Nevada. I mean, beginning of the NFL season, our handle was up 25% year over year, and what are all the reasons for that? You can try to figure it out. But if you told me that some part of that was due to the proliferation of daily fantasy sports betting advertising and discussion in the media, I would say, well, maybe that makes sense too.
And some portion of it's because of mobile in-play betting.
Mobile betting, in-play betting, really good marketing, brand awareness, recovering economy. I mean, there's multiple reasons for it, and just a general cultural acceptance of sports betting. People talk about this point spread regularly. ESPN for a little bit had a cover alert that they were broadcasting earlier in the season. And so there's this much more cultural acceptance of sports betting. It's interesting, Scott Van Pelt on ESPN had a piece around daily fantasy sports betting and the fact that it was gambling and, basically the same thing as traditional sports betting. And so now, noted broadcasters on ESPN are speaking out on the topic. So, there's a lot of things, at play, and you can never, figure out, what the specific percentages are. But I don't know anybody who thinks of daily fantasy sports betting as a competitive threat to traditional sports betting. It's just sports betting.
Right. Any other topics you'd like to touch upon before we wrap up?
No, I think the state of the sports betting industry, certainly here in Nevada, is stronger than it's ever been. Notwithstanding that there was a horrible result for the bookmakers last night in the Monday night game, but we'll survive to fight another day.
Right, all evens out in the end, right?
Well, hopefully it does a little more than even out.
Okay, Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
It.